first, for several years, when I started really getting deep into insight practice, like one of the parts of my mindfulness was really disconnecting from like my usual media sources, which would be kind of like National Public Radio or the news, and even certain types of music, because a lot of the music that I like, it kind of gets sucked me into like an emotional kind of state that wasn't necessarily interested in kind of being in. So I would listen to Dharma talks, and I would typically listen to topics of interest on a platform called Dharma Seed, which you may be familiar with. And it's basically like this huge compilation of mostly teachers from the Insight tradition or who give talks in the Insight tradition. And, um, I came across some of Jack Kornfield's talks on there. I'm like, oh, I would like to hear more of his talks. And because some of his talks were on Dharma Seed, but then he would mention that it's part of a larger podcast. And from there, I would get some of his talks, like his talks on climate change. And he's also like a really good storyteller in terms of like Buddhism. Like, so he always talks about stories of the Buddha. And I had like this deep curiosity about the life of the Buddha. Um, some of the stories that appear in various suttas and the Dharmapada. And his talks were always really good about folding in those stories. So as opposed to, a Dharma talk being, well, some of my searches would probably be on, maybe anxiety, maybe loneliness, maybe, if I wanted to do a certain type of thing in Buddhist studies, like mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of body, I would find talks on that. But I liked his talk because he would fold in like these classic stories and myths that appear in the suttas. And so it kind of, in certain ways, brought me closer, I feel like, to the Buddha himself in terms of how Jack Kornfield was narrating it. And so I would listen to it for those reasons. And I spent a lot of time traveling. And so, when I would be going through airport lines and security or driving to and from places, I would just listen to Dharma talks. So I became like a super Dharma nerd. Like, so like a really super Dharma nerd. Like, even like my book list, like on Audible, I had to like finally start, stop like accumulating so much knowledge, because I would listen to, the Heart Sutra or White Clouds, like some of Thich Nhat Hanh's books, but mostly the books about the Buddha's life. And so I just listened to that because there's no other way to get that information unless you kind of look it up, and that just replaced my prior to that, my news consumption. So it just became Dharma consumption. So it's good, but it's not a replacement for sitting. But I do know that it really strengthened my practice, and because I wasn't being triggered in one way or the other, so I enjoyed listening to those talks. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, I think
Hmm.
it's important to follow, when you have that kind of that what is it like it draw into a deep dive. It's important to dive sometimes, and it's important to kind of really get in there and enjoy as much as you want. But yeah, I know that kind of like sometimes it can be distracting, or sometimes it can be overwhelming, or whatever it is. But I'm glad that you had that experience, and you were able to find resources for you to deepen your understanding of the Buddhist history, but also too that you were able to hear some people share insights into suttas and things like that that can help
Hmm.
you deepen your practice as well. Um,
Sure.
I know too that when my nightstand is full of Buddhist related books, or if I'm consuming a lot of Buddhist media, when I go out in the world and I interact with people that are not necessarily Buddhists, or that are not necessarily consuming the same media that I am, it creates like this very weird wall where they're like, "Oh yeah, I just watched. Have you seen this on Netflix? Have you seen this? Have you read this book? Have you done this thing?" And I'm like, "No." It's like, "Well, what have you been doing?" I'm like, "I I don't know where to start, where to start talking to you about, like, well, the Dhammapada is this thing that I'm reading, and now I have to explain it to you." So it could be kind of an isolating kind of cone that you go into when you go in that hard into a topic. That said, though, like uh, I think it's great that you are diving into it nonetheless. And was Insight something that you had, like, as you were starting your Buddhist path? That's kind of like what opened up for you the first, or the was that was content or talks and communities around you in the Insight tradition around you the most as you were kind of coming up through your Buddhist path?
I would say in terms of Buddhism, I mean, you have to distinguish between meditation and then Buddhism, which are, I think, are two different things. Like my first formal sit was actually a Zen sit. It was in a place called in Montclair, New Jersey, and what attracted me to it was open. Like at 5 o'clock in the morning, they had like sit sessions, and I would go over there before my children got up and go and sit. And so my first like kind of formal meditation was through like through Zen, and and then in terms of insight, I moved into this neighborhood in South Minneapolis called Longfellow, and there was a meditation center in my neighborhood, and so I would go past it, and sure enough, they had like a sit that they had a sit that started at 6:30 and it ran all the way to I think 9, and so I would go in and do those early morning sits, and eventually I started attending Dharma talks there. And after studying mindfulness the way it was kind of taught and practiced there, and then I in doing retreats as well too, I started becoming more interested in Buddhism proper. And so that's kind of how that started. And so I think meditation is one thing, but Buddhism, I would say, I that's one way to narrate that. But another way to narrate it too is like I remember I came across this book called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is a Buddhist text, it's Tibetan Buddhist text. And I would just read that and try to understand it. It would be my nighttime reading, believe it or not. And I would always fall asleep because I didn't really quite understand what I was reading. And then I remember when I was a grad student, the Dhammapada gave a talk at Rutgers University. I think this was probably around 2004, 2005. I didn't say the Dhammapada, the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama gave a talk. And I went to his talk, and then I came across one of his books called Healing Anger. And so that was another book that I would read at night, and I didn't really understand it, but I would read it, and then I would fall asleep, and I would try to do it. But I didn't understand any of it until I started meditating. Like it was just conceptual. So I would say, like my path to Buddhism, I feel like it started through access to books, and then access to meditation centers, and then from there I started practicing primarily with my teacher Mark Numberg through the Insight tradition, and I practiced there for many years, and then I connected with Clouds and Water, I believe, maybe during the pandemic. I connected with Clouds and Water. I went to a few of their things that they had there. They brought in oh, what's her name? Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. They brought her in for a weekend gathering, and I went to their thing, and this is this wonderful community of BIPOC practitioners here. And so I started attending their BIPOC groups. And then eventually I started attending Zen sits, the early morning sits. So a lot of it has to do with like wanting to keep up a regular meditation practice. And the other part is really, what does all this mean? Like, what do these chants mean? Where do they come from? And that curiosity is kind of I really love learning about the different paths of Buddhism and the different schools of Buddhism. And I love practicing. I love meditation, and so that's kind of how I got through there.
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. Well, and it's great that you that this kind of curiosity, like like there's something about these books that you were reading from the Dalai Lama or otherwise, they kind of you couldn't quite get them. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is like it wasn't quite resonating, but there was something there that was keep making you want to finish it, or there was something there that wanted to make you keep diving into it, and then you
Yeah,
eventually find yourself developing a meditation practice, and then you start finding yourself into insight and Zen. I'm so glad that
yeah.
that your own kind of curiosity enriched practice and began a practice.
Mhm,
And did you
mhm.
grow up in a religious household in your early days, or was this something that this religiosity was something that was a little bit more new for you as you were embarking it?
Yeah, I would say I don't think I grew up in a religious household. Yeah, no, not so much. I think we went to church, but I wouldn't call that religious. Um, I spent many Sundays in a Baptist church, and with my maternal grandmother and my paternal grandmother, I spent time in a Methodist church. I didn't know the difference at the time. And I had a great auntie who I was very close to, who was, sanctified Baptist. And so I think there in that household, I think that was the only most religious household, meaning there were hymnals there were Bibles that we were expected to read, and I would be curious about the Bible, so I would read the Bible, like open up a book and read it. And so, but I don't think we grew up religious per se. I think we had. I think I was probably the more spiritually, religiously inclined in my family, but my mom, not so much. My father, I mean, he was a hardcore Christian, but he came that way through AA. But I wasn't raised with him. And so, yeah, so I don't want to call it a religious household. I would say I definitely spent a lot of time in Black churches, um, uh, but my curiosity wasn't fed through that as much as it was having access to hymnals. So making up tunes, like not knowing how to read music, but making up tunes um, to the words and playing with the notes and reading, certain sections of the Bible, like the red stuff. And I also did go to a Lutheran school, but we prayed, but I wouldn't call it religious. I wouldn't call it religious.
Mm.
But I did have access in some intimacies with the church.
And I feel like there's like you were saying how you kind of connected with Cornfield with how he's a storyteller. I'd imagine some of that Bible study or that Bible reading you're engaging with a lot of
Mhm.
story. And I don't know, did that also kind of draw you into those expressions of Christianity? Like, was that something that kind of kept you curious and interested? Was that storytelling element?
I think so. I think so. The story of Jesus drew me in. My great auntie had this huge King James version Bible, and the print was in red. I think what really drew me to Christianity was mostly not even through Christianity, but to the Bible and to the New Testament was like these heart opening stories, like the stories and the parables that Jesus would tell. And so I think I was more drawn to the stories and um, something about the heart and the wisdom of the Bible. The Psalms, I loved the Psalms growing up. I think I did go to a few Catholic schools. It was a Catholic school. Yeah, we learned the Psalms, and I love singing the Psalms because it opened my heart. But when I think of a religious household, or if it was religious, I'm thinking we prayed. I saw how it is the word of God, if you want to call it that, was operating throughout the structure of the household. And I don't think we were religious. I mean, it might be kind of moralistic on my part, but it wasn't religious. But I always had access to the Bible. I had access to religious texts, and I was always drawn to religious texts. I would say that for
Mm.
sure. And that curiosity was actually supported. They were really happy to see me reading the Bible and that sort of thing. But other than my great auntie, who was, like I said, sanctified Christian, he was the only one who was reading the Bible around, and my dad, who was a recovering addict, he was reading the Bible a lot too. But yeah, I wouldn't call it religious.
Mm-mm. And heart I appreciate your phrasing of that, like that heart opening stories or heart opening even exercises of like singing and like singing the psalms
Hmm.
and doing those sorts of things. uh I know that I'm not deeply familiar with insight tradition. I know in Zen there's some chanting, so like Soto Zen, at least for me.
Yeah.
And ha, ha, have you found some heart opening uh sutras, stories, moments, or even like like vocal work, like whether it's chanting or song, that you have found to be something that has helped you open up to some degree?
Absolutely, I would say it's the chants of the songs, which really make me really love the early morning practice. So with Insight, we chant something called the Brahma Viharas, and it's the chant that's focused on these four kind of qualities of loving kindness, compassion, gladness or appreciative joy, and equanimity. I love that chant. We call it the four quarters chant, but it's the Brahma Viharas. Um, I was doing a lot of meditation, particularly studying the Anapanasati Sutta and the Satipatthana Sutta, and like those meditation forms, like really focusing on these different aspects and qualities of mindfulness. And I started practicing as a form of protest during the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis. And And because we were literally meditating in the midst of people rallying and rioting and, you know, all types of stuff, wildness. I mean, I remember George Floyd's funeral. We were meditating right across the street from the church where Reverend Earl Sharpton was speaking. It was a group of us. And, we had chanted the Brahma Viharas. That's what we were doing. And we were sitting in the midst. I mean, we were sitting, literally thousands of people sitting there, and meditating. And then I realized, this isn't what I've been practicing because it's not mind over matter. It's not mindfulness of breath. It's mindfulness of everything. Like the sounds, like I could feel everything kind of penetrating through me. And once I came across the Heart of Great Wisdom, the Heart of Great Wisdom Sutra on emptiness, and then that completely shifted my practice. So so chanting about emptiness, and hearing Avalokiteshvara, hearing about Shari Putra. These were stories that I heard about by the Dalai Lama. I didn't know who Shari Putra was. Oh, Shari Putra. Oh, Shari Putra. Oh, wow. And then moving through that whole, the Heart Sutra, and I'm like, oh, wow, it's a whole world. A whole world just kind of opened up because I realized that there is no separation. And I say all that to say that I feel like the chants is what opens me up to a level of heart wisdom. I would say maybe heart wisdom, but it's the same thing. But a level of wisdom that's that you can't get from the text, and that I don't feel like you can get it from just meditating. Like I don't feel like you can get it. I think you can approximate it, but I don't think that it's almost like this instant click that you can get from just doing the chants and being settled in those words and feeling them vibrate across your body. So yeah. Hmm.
Wow. Wow. Well,
Hmm.
that is what a powerful place to have a moment like that, but also too, what a powerful moment for you to have just in your own practice and in the way that, like, it's amazing that in that moment you were realizing something that had shifted your practice, and it was an opening, but it also kind of expanded, like expanded your understanding
Yeah.
of the world, and the way, the Heart Sutra, talking about form being emptiness and emptiness being form, and how that can
Yeah.
shift things. And did that change how you expressed your activism and advocacy in, like, going forward too? Like it might have shifted your practice, but did it also inform the way that you went about your work?
I would say it did because it really humbled me in terms of knowing that ego itself is just an impediment. And so what it is that we do is not about um, achieving certain types of outcomes. It's more about achieving certain types of realizations about what life actually is, and its limitations, I would say. And so I would say it also threw me for a loop as well too, because I'm like, well, what does all this actually mean? So like the emptiness, like it threw me for a loop because it said all of these things that you've been kind of clinging to, right, are they have substance in this world, but in the end, let it go. Let it go and live in this life fully. It's not about a morality kind of thing. It's about us being able to live more deeply connected to what actually is, and understanding that what is will eventually kind of evaporate. And so I hate to get kind of philosophical, but I would say that's how it kind of shifted my practice. But the other thing is I started writing about my like writing about advocacy and doing stuff with Buddhist justice. And that was a whole other different kind of process because it surfaced some things like, oh, you really feel like this is really how you're interpreting it. But in the end, I would say it allows me to kind of like to let go and not to cling so hard to predetermined understanding of what justice is or what justice can be. That is more about living a life that's fully alive and fully I love this. You know how they talk about right livelihood, like that way of thinking about right livelihood. It's right is not probably not the best word, but live it in such a way that you're able to manifest what it is that we are being called to kind of manifest. So if it's racial justice, like my own thing that I like to write about is gun abolition, because you know I think more people die by guns by than any other kind of tool of weapon that humanity is kind of, or technology that humanity is kind of invented, other than maybe the toxic plastics and chemicals and all that sort of thing. But you know, the guns. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk about this, but nobody wants to talk about guns. Nobody wants to talk about abolishing guns. Like the liberals don't want to talk about it because then the conservative people will be like, oh, they're trying to take away our guns. But it's not about wanting to take away our guns. It's about learning to live without them. You know, it's like learning how to envision a world without like this pervasive threat of us wanting to kind of like annihilate each other because we're afraid. So yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and feel like the context of guns has changed in this country from its beginning, and also too from the early days of the NRA, where it was more like a Boy Scouts sort of thing, and that now it's become kind of more of uh, a walking around with like why is everyone carrying? You know, why are people carrying in the street? Like maybe we need to address the fear that makes people feel so unsafe, and maybe
Hmm.
what would that do? So no, I
Yeah.
absolutely hear that. Um, yeah, and then I know that too. Like you bring sometimes breath and meditation work into your classes, like into the study of Black feminist theory, and I know that you also teach from an intersectional approach. So I always find it hard to talk about intersectionality because you have to talk about everything. But I was like curious about how you bring breath and meditation into the context of those courses that you teach, and
Yeah.
what the responses have been with some of your students.
Yeah, you know, I started doing that because I learned, because I teach a lot about the history of racialized gender in this country, and by that I mean the types of history that gives birth in our country to racial oppression, sexual oppression, gender oppression, class exploitation, and you know just different sorts of things. And so a lot of my my classes are really about trauma, and they're really about how trauma lives in the lives and in the histories of Black people, but especially Black women and Black queer people. Um, and I was teaching this course called Pleasure, Intimacy, Violence. I had kind of coordinated it in conjunction with the Aurora Center for Sexual Violence at the University of Minnesota, and also their Women's Center in Minnesota. And I had kind of initially um, envisioned the class as really teaching explicitly about the afterlife of slavery, but thinking about race and gender as they kind of how they kind of drive, you know, the practice of white supremacy and this world making of white supremacy in the Americas. And I realized like it was traumatizing many of the students, and the texts were hard on our hearts and spirits. And sometimes we talk about sexual violence and rape. Other times we're talking about lynching. Other times we talked about mass incarceration. Other times we talked about the violence of the state against women who are poor, in terms of social welfare agencies and the social welfare system. And it left the students feeling like crying. And I didn't know how to hold this, you know, and angry and resentful and these sorts of things. And I'm like, I had to shift it because I'm not teaching, I'm only teaching them how we survived it. I'm only teaching us about our strength and the resilience, right? But I wasn't talking about how to hold hurt and how to hold harm. And anyways, I ended up shifting the class, and I started teaching, emphasizing the pleasure aspect of these histories and the different forms of the ways in which we had to learn to survive, not through brute strength and willpower, but through opening up connections with each other by sharing joy, by finding ways to be creative. And one of the ways to do that is just simply, you know, by taking a moment and to ground ourselves and center ourselves in the present, to imagine what is. And because I had been meditating for quite a while, and leading and co-leading groups and stuff. I started, well, we started in each class, we just start by sitting like, okay, everybody sit, put your stuff away, put away the devices, the phones, everyone had to get here. And let's just sit, let's put our feet flat on the floor, let's rest our hands on the desk, let's take a deep breath. All right, let's close our eyes and relax the faces around the mouth, and like, let's do that. Okay, and so we'll do that. All right, we do that for a few minutes. And I'm like, okay, let's just check in. How's everybody doing? And then once we started doing that, the whole climate in the classroom shift to one that is based on um, us being together and together moving through this, into an individual having to struggle and cope with material. And that's how it started. I eventually developed a class specifically on racial trauma. So as opposed to just teaching on about, structures of race and racism, interstructural intersectionality, et cetera, I developed a class specifically on racial trauma and how it lands on our bodies and on our spirits. Not just for people of color, not just for Black women, but for everybody who was enrolled in the class. And a big chunk of that class was thinking through structures of how it is that different types of body inhabit um, and internalize white supremacy, and what do we do with it. And I ended up teaching. This is a very popular book about 6 or 7 years ago, Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands. And it was interesting because in this book, he has exercises, he has journaling exercises, he has all this stuff. I'm like, you know what? As opposed to giving you all the most cutting edge essays on a topic, let's just go through and take a workbook style and take it slow. And so we started every class with meditation. We did journaling. We practiced deep listening. We listened to music. We broke out in groups, and then we came back and discussed. And even though the discussion was shorter, right, we got much more meaningful engagement with the material because students were processing what they were feeling as opposed to just memorizing terms and kind of accumulating all this knowledge in their head. I would also say there's one of my graduate students, her name was Naima. She's a professor now at RISD. She talking about the body and how something about embodiment. I'm sorry, I'm messing this up. And she was like, yeah, when we're in a classroom, we act as if we have no bodies, but we do have bodies that we bring into the classrooms, and thinking about our bodies as a source of knowledge and understanding. It's like, yeah, because so much of knowledge is disembodied. But in order to do that, I had to have a very rigorous practice to make sure I wasn't already triggered. And so I did that as long as I could, and I incorporated that to many of my classes. And I continued to do it, but not having, my practice is really, when my practice suffers, then it's harder for me to get into really cultivating a sense of presence. So part of it is just really learning how to cultivate a sense of presence in the classroom and a sense of presence with the materials. So that's what I was doing in those classes. And I continue to do it. I teach pleasure, intimacy, and violence. And students now have an opportunity to facilitate after they've seen me a few times. I'm like, okay, every student gets to facilitate, every person gets to lead, and they'll find little things. We do some EMT tapping in class. We do all types of really interesting things that are mindfulness based in class. But it all started with us just really connecting with our breath, really connecting with our bodies, really connected with us being right here, right now, in this moment.
Wow, that is well, I'm so glad that you found an application for your things that you were developing in your practice, but also too, I mean, like what a wonderful resource that you're introducing into the classroom. Because yeah, I like to think of myself, especially when it comes to academics or any kind of intellectually based conversation or anything like that. It's so heady. It feels like the only thing that exists a part of you is your brain, or even then, it's just kind of very airy and
Mm,
very just up in your thoughts. And then
mm,
when you're processing and dealing with very heavy things, very traumatic things, very triggering things, uh,
mm,
there's no grounding. You just kind of like feel like you're lopsided, or you can't carry it. You like literally can't
mm,
carry that
mm,
amount of hurt and pain in your head, and then it
mm,
colors everything. And then yeah, of course, it makes you unable to latch onto the terms that you're being given, or be able to process more or have conversations. So that full body grounding is such a wonderful way of being able to uh, remind ourselves that we're here and this is a moment that we're sharing together, and then it leads to a more collaborative discussion group, and it leads to a little bit
Mhm.
more initiative on the part of other students being able to lead and facilitate discussions and things like that. So that's a really wonderful uh, thing that you're bringing into the classroom. And I feel like for a lot, definitely the topics that you're going into, but I feel like in education in general, it feels like some kids, when they're learning even earlier on about white supremacy, or just the way that empires and cultures and things like that have shaped the world, it would be helpful to have just some embodiment practices as they
Yeah.
go about it. Um, and then for some of these students, I mean, have they wanted to talk to you about like further discussions about mindfulness, and maybe insight, or like where you go with your practice? Like has it created some curiosity more than just the topics that you're discussing in the classroom?
Yeah, what it's created is like my graduate students go on as professors and incorporate these into their teaching philosophies, and they do it in their own classes. And I feel like the students themselves, they just open up and they just have some level of happiness and freedom and relationship to the topics. So I don't know whether or not, like, let me try. I've taught it. I, like students have their own way of getting the information, and they get it through the internet and YouTube and these sorts of things. But I think what it really opens up is the possibility that this doesn't have to be a lonely, isolated practice. That is something that we do with community to learn how to connect with each other. And I also think that it shows up in students in terms of their self compassion. And this is where I would say it's really important. Um, Many times I'll do it in classes, and I've done exercises where students are, asked to put their hand over their heart, put one hand over their belly. They've never felt that before. And literally you'll get crying, and they learn. I think students have learned how to resource it. Some of them go on to do kind of senior thesis projects, the ones that I kind of like learn about that integrate some of this stuff into it. But I would say what I most say the folks who have learned, who've done it, have been graduate students who've kind of moved on and incorporated these elements into their own kinds of teaching. And so these are new educators, assistant profs who are doing some of this work. And I would say that my undergrads um, are way more, or they practice a lot more vulnerability with me as an instructor that's premised on its aspects of self care. So, for instance, in one of my courses, it's actually a pleasure, intimacy, and violence course. We studied this book called Nap Ministries, like it's like a manifesto. So it's called what's the name of that book? Anyways, it's all about like the importance of rest and resting, and uh, and so students start talking about, oh, I rested today, or I rested this weekend. I did that. So resting is part of their vocabulary, as opposed to just, oh, I didn't do this. Like, no, I rested, and this is what I did. And so they take it into aspects of their own lives that really, I think, is best understood as like them being way more self-compassionate, them being way more fearlessly creative in the things that they say that they want to do, and I think that's more or less how I see it in terms of what they do. I don't know if they are interested in Buddhism or if they go that way, but I do know what was shown to me is a language and a vocabulary of of self compassion and self care and rest. But it's so we talk a lot about those things in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
that's
And
uh,
they it comes up in their papers and their assignments and their senior thesis ideas, yeah.
wow. The addition to the vocabulary of resting, I mean, that is something that a lot of people, I would say, especially in America, have a really hard time without any semblance of guilt attached to it, taking for themselves. Like resting is such
Yeah.
a hard, hard activity to
Mhm,
do because it feels like you're not doing anything, but it's
mhm.
making it so that you can actually do more things. You have to rest. You have to rebuild. You have to take time to care for yourself. Um, And I appreciated what you were saying earlier about how you have to, as someone that's introducing these mindfulness techniques to others, and also like facilitating them within a classroom, you have to kind of make sure that you're in a balanced place, or that you have your practice kind of underneath you to support you as well. Um,
Correct.
what are just some things that help you personally to dial in for yourself? I don't know if the same exercises that you do with your students
Mm.
are things that you do at home for yourself, or if your daily regimen, like kind of like, what does that look like? Is chanting in there? Is a morning sit in there? Does it necessitate being around other people, like within
Mm.
surrounded by a sangha? I was just kind of curious how it manifests for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, well, I'm live. This is I'm in started my third year here in Maryland, and so it's been an adjustment because I used to just be I go to the meditation center in the morning, like 3 or 4 days a week, and then I sit at my house and I'll listen to a Dharma talk, which has a meditation, and it was kind of relying on that. But now, a lot of it is mostly internet based in terms of connecting with sanghas who have online sits. And I also do my own sits when I don't go into groups. And like I would say that consists of, um, so, um, I also sat Zazen for a few years at Clouds and Water. So, you know, how great the robe of liberation, that intro, kind of the morning gathas. And then, take my kick for refuges in the Buddha, um, Dharma Sangha, and I do all, those. Then I do the Heart Sutra, and then I do my Brahma Viharas, and then I'll sit. And then, and I also, interestingly or not, I also kind of have a Nichiren practice. So I keep my little things on me. So sometimes I do my whole Renge Kyo. So like to keep me grounded. And so I just, so I do have a sit. But all of that can be a distraction because in the end, like I could do all of that, but usually I use it. Like I do my morning meditation. That's a devotional practice. So the morning practice is my devotional practice, and then I'll sit, and then sometimes I'll do my altar work in the morning where I'm really caring for my objects on the altar, handling them, that sort of thing. Um, and you can get into these rituals which are beneficial, but then there's this question about where's your breath and where's your breath. And that's when mindfulness becomes really helpful. And what I'll do is when I'll see that I'm getting, you're a little out there, your mindfulness isn't where it could be, a little bit more reactive than you need to be. But then it's, oh, so why don't we just take 5 minutes and just follow the breath? Um, or actually take the whole day and just see when you can come back to your breath, when can you notice the in and out, and when are you able to do that? And so really for me it's almost like I vacillate between a few, because I pick up things and I love them. They're like jewels, but I use them as tools to kind of facilitate my own sense of wellness. I'm a person who's like, for at least, I don't know, since I was in my early, maybe mid 20s, I've have suffered from anxiety and depression. And so to take care of those particular ailments, that has to always be a part of it. The other thing I'll say that's really important to me are the sitting groups that I'll attend, like 2 or 3 sitting groups a month, usually BIPOC sitting groups, um, and also retreat practice. So really, at some point, you know, get on like a 5, 6, 7 day retreat at least once a year. Trying to sit at least a full day, um, once a month or once every 6 weeks or something. Find a full day sit, do a weekend sit. And those things are what really ground me. It's a little difficult now because I used to be anchored to a meditation center. And so now I have to kind of piece it together with these different sanghas, and there are many of them. I'm thinking specifically about Deep Time Liberation, Baltimore Beyond. This is another sitting group here. Um, there are multiple ones, but just really finding opportunities to be able to have some kind of retreat practice is really valuable. Yeah, but it's kind of like in the early days, you're super into it, right? And then as you kind of grow and mature and life changes, you end up having to have um, a more sophisticated understanding about how these things play out when you don't have perfect conditions. And so how do you practice when the conditions aren't perfect? And how can you remember to practice like the simplest things, like the simplest mindfulness of breath, mindfulness of body, like just remembering to practice is the challenge. And that's what I try to do to keep myself sane. But I would say my early morning practice is basically like that whole thing, take the refuges, do my couple of chants. And then, sometimes I'll do my nam, whole Renge Kyo chants. And also Gate is another good mantra to do, the Prajna Paramita. And these are just ways to settle yourself. But I feel like all of those are beautiful practices and magical practices. But when you connect the breath to the body, to the here and now, then that's when it becomes beautiful and clear like a glass of water. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I find the you can be engaged with the various elements of reading, reciting, and all that, but that that constant almost flow that's happening in your body, that breath that's happening, it's like, well, that's also extremely grounding thing that happens all the time. I forget to look at it all the
Mm-hmm.
time too, and so and that is that's very much keeping that's a sustaining force that deserves recognition as often as possible. And then there's I don't know if reward is the right way of saying it, but there is an impact that that happens when you recognize it and you acknowledge it and let it happen. And there's this, yeah, it's an amazing thing to have that kind of mindfulness and awareness of breath. And two, like you are also extremely busy. You're an extremely busy person, and you write a lot, and you're very prolific, and you're doing some really heavy lifting when it comes to the depth of your study and your research and the books that you are writing. And how, how does this apply to when you sit down and you start writing an academic text or an article or something like that? Like how does I feel like I get kind of crunched up, my shoulders go up, and I'm like trying to type away and do something impressive or interesting. How do you bring up um, uh, or do you have like a mindfulness thing while you write that happens?
Yeah, I do a lot of writing sometimes. But this is the thing. I try to I like to write when the conditions are perfect and when I'm feeling relaxed. And so I don't know if you could see my office. I'm gonna turn this around. Like I have a whole lot of oils over there.
Oh, okay.
So I have these little
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I have
yeah.
all of my essential oils. And so basically how I write is, I try to do it's so interesting because I will not write a single thing until like I am relaxed and it's there. And then my issue is like I need to hurry up and get it out while it's there. And so I tense up and then I'm like, shit. And then you tense up and then your mind goes blank. Or you tense up and you start editing what you wrote. And then, but what I've noticed is like the more relaxing, particularly these muscles here, these chest muscles, because this is what gets us. Like when we're writing, we literally do scrunch up and we contain, and it makes it tough. And so for me, the writing process is, and I have to write in spurts. There are people who are writers and they can get up and write and they keep a level of relaxation there. But for me, I have to attain that level of relaxation and clarity and focus on what it is I'm supposed to be doing. And then I'm able to get it done. But I also use, like I said, essential oils to help calm me, um, um, to help, these are like little tricks that you can do when you're not present. So even the oils is all about get into the present moment. When you write, you actually have to open up your third eye, your imagination. Your crown chakra has to be open. If you can see, it has to be super open, and you can only really get that way is is I believe through some level of relaxation and receptivity. I don't think that you can be receptive like this. To be receptive, you have to be like open. And so like how is it that one can remain open? And so, for me, I use a lot of aromatherapy techniques to try to get open. I use deep breathing to try to get open. Um, but it's always a struggle. Like it's a constant struggle for me. I'm writing a memoir. And I'm in the, and probably I think I'm in stage 3.5 out of 4 stages of completing this memoir. So I'm almost at the tail end. And it's currently called To Rape a Butterfly, Black Adulthood and the Afterlife of Childhood Violence. It's kind of messing with the title. Black womanhood and the afterlife of childhood violence, but specifically child sexual violence. And it takes a lot of moving back through the past and history. And it takes a lot of just putting it down and letting it rest and picking it up when you're ready. And so sometimes the process of writing for me is much slower than it used to be. When I was a younger scholar, I can, sit down and hack out 20 pages and maybe 4 hours tops, and take another 4 hours and get the stuff cleaned and get my side sources together. But now, being mindful and being understanding like how much we hold as we become older, like our memories, the past, our experiences, we're holding a lot more that comes to that keyboard for every word. And just learning how to create a receptive presence to my own ideas. And I do that like, through deep breath, but through, do oils, through journaling. But I think a lot of it comes also of just putting it down when it's time to put it down and coming back when I'm ready for it to, when it's ready to come back. And that can create a lot of issues with publishers because they like deadlines. But like I tell my students, we don't have deadlines, we have lifelines. This is your lifeline. If you get it done here, then you can move on and do something else. So and so it takes a different type of it takes a different kind of presence to do that. And it's a slower process, but I have to just be more gentle with myself. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I really enjoy the how you appreciate what happens when you get older, especially when you're in your early 20s or something like that. The world is your oyster, and you're just kind of writing. You can like write about all these like things that you're discovering for the first time. But then when you write when you're a little bit older, a lot more comes to each key, as you type it. And so if
Yeah.
you talk about a smoothie, when you're younger, it's one thing, and when you're just talking when you're older, like
Hmm.
I can't drink those anymore. It's just too much sugar, and that's upsetting to me. And then you
Hmm.
like think of all the things that your history is bringing to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I appreciate what you're saying, like how you are giving yourself some space, how you're trying your best to make sure that you're not getting so tight. You're creating and facilitating ways for you to make very meaningful work. And I'm so happy to hear that you are so close to completing a very powerful memoir and telling your story. So I'm excited to hear about
Yeah.
that. And that kind of ties into I just have kind of as we wrap up our really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for taking your time taking time with me today. I had kind of a two-part question. One is that if there's anything that you would like to uh, promote or get more eyes and ears on, whether it's a thing, something that you're working on, a project or a foundation or a cause that you're familiar with that you'd want other people to know about. And then two, if there's any advice that you'd want to give to somebody that's on the Buddhist path uh, that you'd like to offer some advice that you would have wanted to have heard when you were coming up through it. Um, and
Oh,
while you think about those, I just wanted to mention that you are the author of Urban Black Women and the Politics of Resistance, as well as some other works as well. And you do work with the Buddhist Justice Reporter and have written for Lion's Roar and Tricycle Magazine in case anyone's interested in finding you there. But yeah, I just wanted to see if there's anything that's coming up, especially this memoir.
yeah. Part of this process, I would say, poetry is really one of these beautiful um, offerings that humans have kind of created in conjunction with, you know, the earth and the planet and the ways we interact with it and narrate our relationship to it. But I am well, I'm not a part of, I facilitate a poetry workshop called The Spiritual Wisdom of Black Women's Poetry. And for our first cohort was last year. We had about 15 women who are part of it, and we meet online, and we study really just the poetry of Black women poets. I think poetry is such a beautiful way to open up the spirit. I love poetry. We studied the poetry of of Audre Lorde, Gwendolyn Brooks, um, Sonia Sanchez. We just studied, we put together her, but it's an amazing group of Black women. Um, Many of them are Buddhist teachers, professors, and writers, but I would love for more people to become involved who are part of that. And I'll be starting a new, opening up a new cohort in January, which I love. There's so much. I mean, when do we ever get to study Black women poets or study poetry, just generally speaking? And we do that in that group, which is really wonderful. But I would also say it's a way of starting a sangha. What it is a little mini sangha. Um, Even though we don't go through, there are many Black women from various kinds of traditions, Buddhist traditions, and some are non-practicing, um, or who who are or non-practicing. But there are a lot of like really beautiful people who are part of that group, and it's all about just amazing Black women poets. This time we're reading, I say in November we're reading Maria Dessa Ikare Tali, who's another pretty incredible Black African American woman poet. So I say that to say that sanghas are important, and this is what I would say to in terms of your second question, because they kind of tie together. It's so important to find sangha, and that is other people who are willing to sit with you, who are willing to meditate with you, and to be there by your side and to talk about the experience. I wish, I mean, I wish I had known earlier how important Sangha was, because when I was in Sangha, you were able to share with your learning, you were able to check in. Because really, I think a big part of Buddhism is really about, learning how to practice friendliness and unconditional friendliness. A big part of it is about being able to cultivate joy and to be able to share that joy with other people, and create moments of just unanticipated kinship and connection. And you're able to do that in Sangha. And so I think that's an important part. So even if you study, if you listen to Dharma talks, you really, I think you have to be in Sanghas with people who are like you, right? And whose experiences resonate with you and where you feel safe. So I think that's a big important part of it, is finding a place where you can feel safe and where you can meditate together. I think those are some of the big things to know. The other thing, one of the reasons why people are really excited about our poetry group is because many practitioners have to they're like the lone dark spot in the world of like I mean, honestly, you don't get around the idea that you end up having to, you end up having to literally, there's a way in which you end up encountering white teachers, which is good, but it's also a little bit of a sting to our hearts. Um, but but I would also say that you can learn a lot, and I think it's worth it. And the reason I say it's worth it is because it's really important to have access to it's important to, it's best way you can, however you can get it, to have access to Buddha's teaching, to have access to practitioners who have a really sincere practice, and and that's important too. And sadly, not many Black folks. I mean, there are teachers such as Reverend Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. There are teachers like Earthlyn Manuel, Zanju Earthlyn Manuel, and there are other teachers such as I'm over in my group. Ruth King is a senior teacher who's in the group. Amanda Brimbury Johnson. There are senior Black teachers, but they teach nationally, and many of them don't have their own sanghas. I also think it's important for you to, if there is a meditation group and that teacher may not be of your same ethnicity, they may actually be Vietnamese or Asian or something else. Whatever they are, it's important to have a teacher. And if you can connect with a Black woman teacher or a Black person who's a teacher or a POC teacher, person of color teacher, that's wonderful. But if you're not, I would still say it's better to go with, to also connect with any teacher who has it, as long as they're principled and you can discern the goodness in them, and to get the Dharma. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is something too, like just speaking to what you were saying for that second question, where you are someone that has navigated a Buddhist path, you found Sangha, you were more or less anchored to a community, and now here you are in Maryland, 3 years in, and you are building, you're here, you are trying your best to find Sangha where it can be found, and then if not,
Yeah.
building it and, like, creating spaces for where you can have Sangha in a poetry group or otherwise,
Yeah.
and make make that visibility aspect of your life and also of your practice possible,
Mhm.
and very much incorporated into your life and practice, as opposed to
Mhm.
something where you always kind of feel like you're outside. Thank you
Mhm.
for sharing that. And Dr. Isoke, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm very excited about your upcoming memoir. I know that you're almost there, and I know that things like this take time, but I would love to connect again and to hear more about your work, and to hopefully see it on bookshelves or otherwise, and learn more about what you're working on. So thank you again for taking the time today.
Thank you, Vincent. It's such a pleasure, and I'm gonna look you up and see what you've been about, and I look forward to just being connecting with you in another time and space. But I know it'll happen.